Hi, I've talked about how we can use linear regression to hedge beta in our portfolios. And if you recall in those videos, we used something called an information ratio to compare the hedged portfolio to the unhedged portfolio. But there are more use cases to the information ratio than just comparing a hedged portfolio to an unhedged one. For example, if you had multiple portfolios with different equities in it and you wanted to determine which portfolio had the most consistent returns, the information ratio would be something you could use to figure that out. So in today's video, we're going to do that. And it's worth checking out Investopedia's on information ratio. It's essentially taking a measurement of the portfolio's returns beyond the returns of the benchmark compared to the volatility of those returns. So each combination is going to have a different level of volatility to it. And so it can be a little difficult to compare a portfolio without taking the volatility into account. So the information ratio attempts to allow an investor or a manager to basically determine the consistency of a portfolio's returns. And I really like the information ratio. The higher it is, the more consistency it will have in its returns. Okay, so enough of that. Let's at least get started here. We're gonna import the usual suspects here. We actually don't need this regression part since we're not going to be using anything like that. What's cool about calculating the information ratio is that the calculation is actually relatively simple. You take the portfolio return that you want, you subtract each instance from the benchmark return, and then you need to calculate what the tracking error is, but it's typically the standard deviation of the difference um, of your active return. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. You can see here I've created 4 portfolios in the S&P 500. Each portfolio has 9 different equities in them, and none of these equities are commingled in other portfolios. So these are all completely original, non-commingled portfolios, meaning that eBay is not going to be found in any of these 3. Ford is not going to be found in any of the others portfolios. They're all completely independent of one another. We're going to be using the S&P 500 as our benchmark. So obviously we want a portfolio that's going to beat the market, the general market. And we're going to use the past 5 years. We're using the end date as of whenever I'm filming this on the 18th of January, and the start will be 5 years ago, starting from today. Then we're going to create a function here that downloads the portfolio. We're just grabbing the close, and then we're calculating the returns using the percent change day over day. And then we're dropping any non-values that we have as well. And that's going to return our portfolio returns. We're going to do that on each portfolio, and then we're going to do the same thing on our index returns so that we know what our benchmark returns are as well. We run that. You can see it's going to start downloading each of the 4 portfolios. This last one here is the index, the S&P. To give you an idea of what the output is for these portfolios, here's the first 5 rows of our portfolio 1 returns. It's all in the negative, and you'll see why, because in the beginning of 2020, when the lockdowns happened and the market closed, there was extreme volatility in that area of time. So I wanted to capture that in our analysis here to see which portfolio was most consistent in one of the more volatile periods in recent history. You'll see the index returns here as well, and we've just renamed this to index so that we don't get confused from our other portfolios when we um, begin to plot it. So let's go ahead and start plotting our first. So what we've plot here is the daily returns of our portfolio and our index, the range, and then across time as well. So blue is the portfolio one returns, and the index is the orange returns. And we'll do that for all of the portfolios. They'll pretty much all look somewhat similar, but because they have different equities in them, they're all just a little bit different. Of course, you're going to see the main, big spike in volatility here in the beginning of 2020. That's to be expected. And graphing this out gives you a decent idea of what you could expect across time for all your different portfolios from 2020 to 2025. It's helpful to know what is in these portfolios. I sort of randomly went through the S&P 500 list and just grabbed I grabbed these four first, and then these four second, these four, and I just sort of threw a bunch of different companies that I was familiar with into each one. But obviously, I would put more thought into this when you're building out your portfolios that you want to compare. The idea here is that you're trying to maybe find a variance in your own risk tolerances. So you might say like, well, this one I expect to be more risky, this one's maybe mid risky, and this one's like probably going to be safe, and this one's an I don't know kind of thing. You might want to do that if you're going through this exercise yourself. But for now, these are just random. So I have no idea which portfolio would be most consistent here. But now that we've done that, we're ready to calculate the information ratio. And it's a simple function. We're going to pass through the portfolio returns and the benchmark returns. The active return is the portfolio return on that day minus the index return. That's going to give you a difference. And then the tracking error is the standard deviation from the active returns. And then we return the average active return divided by the tracking error, which is our standard deviation. And then we do that for each portfolio, and then we'll print it out. So portfolio 1, 0.036, portfolio 2, 0.56, portfolio 3, 0.59, portfolio 4, 0.46. So what are these ratios telling us? Well, if you recall, the higher the information ratio, the more consistent the adjusted returns are for that portfolio. So in this case, portfolio 3 is telling us that these combination of assets are the most consistent across those 5 years when it comes to providing a return. The returns aren't that great. It's only 0.0, almost 0.6, I guess that's the ratio, but essentially that the returns that you're going to get day over day are not going to be that much greater against the market, but it is greater. So that's good to see. And then portfolio 1 would be our most volatile portfolio. Let's break it out a little bit here. So what exactly is our active return here? So if I type in active return portfolio, you'll see it's just the difference. So in the beginning of the year, or the beginning of 2020, we were going negative against the benchmark. So when we took the difference of our portfolio return and subtracted it from our benchmark return, our portfolio return was less than the index return, which is why it's going negative. But here, more recently, in our most volatile portfolio, mind you, we were actually doing better. We still had a difference left over against the index return. But if we look at our calculations here, that we need to take into a tracking error, and we do that by calculating the standard deviation of our returns here. So if we just type in STD, you can see it's 0.106. So that's our deviation for our returns here. But it's not just the tracking error that we're interested in. We're dividing the average of our returns across that time by this deviation number here. So what is our average adjusted return here? It's 0.0038, but we're not taking into account the deviation. So if we take into account the deviation, that's where we get our information ratio. So this function is really just helping us consolidate this calculation across all the portfolios. But hopefully that helps you, I guess, conceptualize where we're getting um, this number from, this ratio number from. Let's go ahead and go look at portfolio 3 and portfolio 1 to see what kind of companies are in there. So it looks like we have Accenture, um, Bank of New York, CVX, I think is Chevron, maybe Deere Company. I see Goldman Sachs, Home Depot, um, Intuit, and Eli Lilly. FDX. What is FDX? X is FedEx. Okay. So interesting that this is the most consistent return in that volatility state between 2020 and 2025. Portfolio 1 was our most volatile. It was the least consistent when it came to adjusted returns. That had things like eBay in it. Oh, this is Goldman Sachs here. GD is GD. Oh my goodness. General Dynamics. Gotcha. Um, and we had okay. So then Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase here. So yeah, this is a CH Robinson, which is a logistics company, 3M. And this is useful to know, and it could be like just one of these is throwing us off for that information ratio. So beyond this is another use case of information ratio, and this is a good way to compare your risk-adjusted returns for multiple portfolios when they're not commingled. What would be interesting is, let's say you had, like, you could pull any S&P 500 symbol if you could calculate which combination of the portfolio would give you the most consistent adjusted returns, that would still beat the benchmark here. That might be something that we work on in a later video, but hopefully now you have a better sense of how to compare different portfolios. I hope this helps. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments if there's maybe something you'd want me to check out or try differently here. What kind of experiences you've had. Interested to hear what you guys are working on. So take care. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.